In this presentation, we will take a look at the concept of lists within QuickBooks Pro 2019. For more accounting information and accounting courses, visit our website at accountinginstruction.info. Here we are on the home page. We currently have the open windows open. In order to open the open windows, go to the view drop down and to the open windows list. If you want to start working and just start entering data into a problem, you can jump forward to the problem that starts with a 6, the presentations that start with a 6, and we'll start just entering data and starting a new company file. Here, we're navigating through the information and learning some terminology to navigate around the system effectively. This time we're going to be talking about lists. Now you may think you know what a list is, but a list is something specific with regard to QuickBooks. QuickBooks uses lists to group certain items. So if we just talk about a list like apples, tires, corn, television, sunshine is a list of stuff, no, that's not what we're talking about for QuickBooks. And remember that the QuickBooks is always going to have that terminology a little bit different. Accounting is the language of business, has a different terminology in order to understand accounting terminology. QuickBooks differs even from accounting. So within QuickBooks, we need to know some of the terminology there. And lists is one way that QuickBooks groups some of the items. So if we look at the lists drop down here, these are kind of some of the things that will be grouped within lists. Now also note that if you're working with the online version, they may not have the same kind of setup. So lists still is something that's going to be commonly used by QuickBooks users, but may not be as commonly used given they don't have exactly the same lists drop down. So even between the different versions of QuickBooks, the terminology could be changing. So here we have the lists drop down. Now, the most common list that we're going to have is going to be the chart of accounts. So when you think about lists, you're going to think about the chart of accounts. It's going to be the most common list within QuickBooks. Then we're going to have item lists. These are going to be really the main two. So when you think about lists in the drop down, you want to think chart of accounts lists and then the items list. So that's what we'll go into and that's what we'll spend our time on. But then just the other items in here, fixed asset item lists. So different types of fixed assets if we're tracking the fixed assets, property, plant, and equipment. Price level lists, sales tax code lists, which could be important, of course, if we have different areas like a sales or a usage tax. So there's tax on the sale of stuff. We might have different lists that will track the codes for that. Payroll item lists, and then other names. So let's take a look at the major two lists. They're going to be the item lists and the chart of accounts. So if we go into the chart of accounts, that's going to be a list of accounts here. Major list that we will have. The chart of accounts is going to be generated if we start a new company. Then as we set up the system, we're going to choose which type of industry we are in. In our case, we chose a merchandising company that sells guitars so we sell merchandise, and we have service because we have guitar lessons and whatnot. And so we chose a merchandising company and we allowed QuickBooks, we said, would you help us with the chart of accounts? And it gave us a chart of accounts, which is in essence going to be a list of the accounts that we will use to when we enter data, when we enter forms, when we enter financial transactions to post to. So these will be the items that will actually be on the financial statements, be on the forms, be on the balance sheet, be on the income statement. So clearly this is going to be a really important list that we will have. And it's going to be one of those things that we're going to set up first. So when we think about the lists, we're often thinking about those things that are on the kind of the back end, the things that the data entry folks are not really dealing with, the things that are going to help us to make the data entry more simple. So when we enter invoices, when we enter sales receipts, bills, we typically aren't dealing with the lists such as the chart of accounts because they'll already be in the system. We may have to add some now and again, but our hope is that this type of list, this type of back-end type stuff is set up, and therefore we can have somebody else just basically put the system together. So the lists are the building block. The lists are oftentimes the difficult thing that we need to get running properly in order to make data input run easily. This list will be in format, it'll be in a specific format, and the difficult thing about this list, as we'll talk about when we set up the new company, will be making sure that we have the right items when we set up new items within the list. And it's always going to be in order. It's going to be assets, and then liabilities, and then equity, and then income and expense. And that's not just QuickBooks, that's any kind of item list. It's going to be the order of a trial balance, an order of the accounting equation. You can think of it assets, liabilities, equity, and then within equity, income and expenses. So it's assets, liabilities, equity, income, and expense. And then within there, there's going to be more specific items. For example, a bank is an asset, but it's more specific. It's a banking. And that's because it has special needs. This list has special needs. So we got to make sure we set that up. Accounts receivable is an asset, but it's more specific. It's an accounts receivable. So it has special needs. So it's in order by liquidity now within assets. And then the other accounts receivable, more liquid than fixed assets like equipment. And then we've got other assets, and then we've got liabilities, accounts payable, more specific liability, accounts payable, credit card. And notice over here, I'm talking about the type, not the label. So this is the checking account, accounts receivable account, but it's also the bank account type and accounts receivable account type. This is an inventory asset, which is an other current asset account type. Down here in the liabilities, this is a Visa credit card, which is going to be a credit card account type, which is a liability. We have interest payable, which is an other current liability account type. And then down here, equity, let's go to owner's equity, is an equity account type. And then income, which is revenue. So merchandise sales, income or revenue, and then expenses. So that's going to be the order here. Just be aware that when you want to find this very important list, you're going to work with this a lot whenever you see a problem, or you think you need to add something, or you need to change the settings of the accounts or how the reports are being demonstrated or something like that. Then you're going to go to the chart of accounts, and to do so, you're just going to go to the lists drop down and choose that chart of accounts. I'm going to close this out now. Also, you can also find the lists on the home page. So we're currently back to the home page, and within the company section, you can find the chart of accounts. If you select the chart of accounts, that's another way you can get into this information. So I typically go to the lists drop down for the chart of accounts, and the reason is because I often am going there from some random spot where I'm not on the home page. So I would go to the lists for that particular item. It's my habit. And so if I close this back out, the next one we're going to find is going to be under lists as well. And it's also on the home page as well, but it's going to be the item list. So if we go to the item list, this is going to be another one. The lists are really going to be those building block things that we don't expect data entry people to have. We don't, if we're hiring someone just to enter the invoice or record the sales receipts during the day, we don't really expect them to set up the lists. We would hope that the lists are set up well so that when they do create an invoice or a sales receipt, all they have to do is just put in the information and the list will do the work. So in other words, the lists are going to list such as inventory items and service items, which will be used to create invoices and sales receipts. And in this case, we're just going to list out the things we do. So we have guitar lessons here because we do guitar lessons in our business. And so that's a service item. There's no inventory related to it. And then we've got our inventory items here. These are actual guitars, an Epiphone Les Paul, Epiphone Standard Pro, Epiphone Riviera, and whatnot. Those are going to be the major types of things within this list. And those are going to be the major things we need so that we can properly create an invoice and a sales receipt. So for example, if we go back to the home page and we take a look at an invoice here, this would be us billing the client. We're going to send a bill to the client, an invoice. If we go to an invoice and we're going to go back one, you'll note that this has an ELP and it says item there. The item is in the list. So we have to enter this into the list. Now it is possible for us to just type in an item and it not be there, but then we would add it to the list if it was there, or not have an item at all possibly and just make a description and tell us what the rate is. But you can see what the goal here would be is that I want all the items to be in there and standardized. I want the item to know what the rate is on what we're selling here so that I can have basically anybody input it, including myself, in the future and not have to look up what the sales price is on the list. So the invoice can do this work by me just choosing the ELP that we're selling an Epiphone Les Paul, and that's all I need to know. and it'll say, well, that's a rate of $500, and it'll even calculate the sales tax, which is a sales tax in the item list, and that's going to say that we owe the $525. So this invoice is actually doing a lot of work, even though it's very easy to input. By us just knowing that we're selling the Epiphone Les Paul, this invoice through the items, the driving, the back end, that's allowing us to create the end result, the financial statements, will affect accounts receivable going up by 525. It will affect the sales going up by 500. It'll affect sales tax payable going up by 25. Not only that, but if we're dealing with inventory, which we are here, we're selling a guitar, and we're tracking inventory within the system, which again, you want to be careful whether or not you want to be working if you're a bookkeeper with customers that are going to try to track inventory within the system or not. Just note if you want to be able to set up those inventory items, if you want to deal with the setting up of inventory items or not. But if we are, like if I go to this Epiphone Les Paul in the items list, and we'll show how to do this once we enter the items as we start to create. But there's this item here. If I double click on that, it also sets up not only the sales price, but the cost. So I'm going to close this back out, go back to the invoice in the open windows. Even though we don't see that $400 cost here, the system knows it and will also use this invoice to record the reduction of inventory at a cost of $400 and the related expense of $400 on the income statement. All that is being recorded by us just entering this invoice and mailing it. So someone that can just enter this invoice and mail it is really doing all that because it's been standardized, it's been set up. That standardized and set up has been driven by the items. So the items are the major kind of back-end thing that we got to get right in order for the data entry to be simple. So we'll close this back out. Same thing is going to be true if we go back to the home page in the open windows for the sales receipt. We can imagine someone in the store, we just have someone helping us making sales. And we say, all you got to do is when they come up with a guitar, we'll open that up, is choose the guitar that they came up with. This is rent. Let's say if it's an ELP guitar, then just type that in and that'll do the work. Then you collect the money. That's all we need to know. And the system will record the complex transaction, increasing cash, increasing sales tax payable, decreasing inventory, increasing cost of goods sold by just being able to enter this data being memorized by the items. So we're going to close that back out. We'll go back to the items here. So within the items, those are the major ones. Now the service items, same thing, except it's a bit easier to set up because there's no inventory. So when we make an invoice with a service item, the only transaction is really to increase the accounts receivable and increase sales. There's no sales tax typically, and there's no there's no inventory decreasing or cost of goods sold. So those are the major things in the items that we deal with, the service items and the inventory items that will be used to generate the invoice and sales receipts. We do, however, also have the sales tax item that you can see here, and those are going to be driving the sales tax. That's how it knows whether it's a 5% sales tax. And we could have multiple sales tax or usage tax items depending on the location we are in. So if we go back up to the lists up top, we've got the chart of account, item lists. We won't take a look at the fixed assets, the price levels. I'm not going to go through that. The sales tax code, this is, if we select that, this is going to tell us the tax code to tell us whether an invoice is taxable or not. So we're going to say, it's, in this case, if we have a simple tax code, either it has tax or it doesn't, meaning service items, for our example, will not be taxable, and we'll say none. And if we go to merchandise, guitars, it will be taxable. And now let's go to lists drop down again, and let's go to that last list I want to look at is the payroll item list. So if we go to the payroll item list, then that's going to give us some information that we'll need to set up. And these are going to be, once again, some of the back-end kind of driving documentation that we'll need in order to set up payroll, such as here's the Medicare and Social Security items, which are setting up the rates that we're going to have to take from the employees. So this is going to be the stuff that will set up the payroll and make it, once again, a lot easier. We can train someone to process the payroll, and once these are set up, the processing of payroll will be much easier. The back-end stuff takes a little bit of time to get set up. Once it is set up, we can just process those checks and go through that processing in a much more smooth fashion. Then that process, the creation of the forms, the creation of the payroll checks, can be used to automatically generate the financial statements, the balance sheet, the income statement, and supporting documentation. If we go back to the home page here, you'll also note that in the company section here, we do have the items and service items. So we could select this, and that'll take us to our items where we had our inventory and service items. This is another area where when I go here, I typically go from the lists dropdown because I could be anywhere. I might be working on an invoice. I might be looking at a financial statement when I want to go here. I might not be on the home page, and therefore I typically for this component use the dropdown to get there. For more accounting information and accounting courses, visit our website at accountinginstruction.info.